This case brings us to Stowmarket, a town in Suffolk, UK. Stephen and Anne Surl, a well-known couple in the area, had been married for 45 years. They lived in a small cul-de-sac in the Brickfields neighborhood, with their 3 sons and many grandchildren often visiting. Stephen, 64, and Jessica, and 62, who went by and first met as teenagers in Glasgow. Stephen was about to join the Royal Marines, where he would serve for the next 30 years. Not long after, they married and welcomed their sons, Gary, Christopher, and Stephen Jr., forming a close-knit family that moved frequently to follow Stephen's military postings. Stephen Jr. recalls a joyful childhood filled with laughter, never minding the relocations as long as they were together. In the 1990s, Stephen left the military, and the family settled in Stowmarket, where they ran a pub and later a bowling alley, staying active and engaged in the community. Their sons soon married and had children of their own, and Stephen and Anne loved the hustle and bustle of their grandchildren being around. Given their very social businesses, Stephen and Anne quickly became popular in the town and were loved by locals and tourists alike. Stephen Jr. described Anne as the glue and backbone of the family who lived for her children and grandchildren, and their father was their idol and best friend. Between the years of 2013 and 2017, Stephen Sr. started working as a councillor for the UK Independence Party, more commonly known as UKIP, for Stowmarket South on Suffolk County Council. People in the town said he was very hands-on and active in his role, and before long he was quite a high-profile person in the local political scene. As good as everything had seemed from the outside for Stephen and Anne, behind closed doors can often tell a very different story. By 2017, after Stephen was unsuccessful in the local elections, his and Anne's relationship was at an all-time low. There had been murmurs around town for a while about the couple's issues. The reality was, since the early 90s, the pair had been hiding a lot of volatility and problems from a lot of people. Stephen was extremely controlling, often belittling and putting her down. And before long, the verbal fights became physical altercations, and Anne would often be concealing bruises on her arms and legs. When the family moved to Suffolk, the problems only escalated further, and it reached a point where they were fighting every day. Stephen started threatening her life, telling her he could destroy her if he wanted to. On one occasion, inside the pub they owned and in front of customers, Stephen fired a shotgun above Anne's head when he thought she wasn't showing him respect. He then tried to throw her down the stairs. The police were called several times, but things never went any further. One thing that only poured more fuel on the fire was that Stephen and Anne were both heavy drinkers and had been for years. The more they drank, the worse the arguments would get. Anne had been to rehab before and was aware that she had a problem. By 2017, she admitted that her drinking was out of control. Her mental and physical health was on a rapid decline, and she was miserable. Things got even worse when it came to light that Stephen had had an affair that would last for 3 months. Anne, who was having suspicions that Stephen was involved with someone else, eventually guessed the pin to his phone and discovered many exchanges between Stephen and a contact called SBG, his code for Steve's beautiful girl. She was devastated, but had no clue who it was and begged Stephen to tell her everything. After denying it for weeks, the truth finally came out. It turned out that Stephen had been having an affair with his own son's wife and mother of his grandchild, Anastasia. This was a bombshell for the family. Everyone was horrified. When Anastasia was confronted, she said that Stephen had been chasing her for years, long before she started seeing his son Gary. At one point, she found out Stephen had a folder on his computer full of photos of her, some where he had photoshopped her into graphic and explicit scenes. He then started sending her photographs of himself from decades ago when he was a bodybuilder, telling her he was lonely and hadn't had sex in years. Anastasia said after months of his persistence, and being fearful of what he might do if she continued to say no, she and Stephen started a sexual relationship. Stephen Jr. said when it all came out, it was a very dark day for the whole family. The betrayal had so many levels to it. He said his mother was completely broken and mortified. Anastasia said she was in a vulnerable place at the time, maintaining she felt ashamed and guilty, and was sorry that any of it had happened. Gary stopped talking to his father after this, and he and Anastasia said they had started working hard to repair their marriage. Gary said it brought them closer, and they remain committed to each other. After news of the affair came out, on top of the endless fights and emotional and physical abuse for so many years, Anne was in a very dark place, but told people that she was worried she was too old to start again. Having been with Stephen for 45 years, the thought of moving on was too overwhelming for her, and she said that she would push through and make it work no matter what. As Christmas 2017 was approaching, it seemed that Anne had turned over a new leaf. By December, she had given up smoking, was working on controlling her drinking again, and had lost a lot of weight. She told colleagues that she was feeling positive about her future and was keen to put the past behind her. Despite all of this, sadly, Christmas Day for the family was a less than happy occasion. With the tension already palpable, everything was turning into a fight. Anne was disappointed that Stephen hadn't bothered to get her anything nice to unwrap, and was left tearful and embarrassed when Stephen threw the Christmas dinner she had made in the bin. That night, with her mood at an all-time low, Anne posted a troubling and sad status to Facebook. "Happy Christmas to you all. Hope you are doing well. Have a good day. I hope I will still be here in 2018. We will see," she said. 5 days later, everything would change. 10:20 p.m., December 30th, 2017. Police received a disturbingly calm call from none other than Stephen Surl. As can be heard from the 999 call, police had arrived at the house in less than 2 minutes. As he let them inside, Stephen said, "Sorry, I've been a very naughty boy. Everyone has their breaking point." Paramedics tried to revive Anne for half an hour, but she was pronounced dead at 10:58 p.m. Several hours later, at 4 a.m., Stephen Jr. was woken up by officers banging on his door. He was expecting them to tell him that someone in his family had been in a car accident or had suddenly fallen ill and was in hospital. When they told him the awful truth that his mother was gone and his father was responsible, he said the wind was knocked out of him and he went totally numb. Stephen Surl was remanded in custody, and on the January 2nd he appeared at Southeast Suffolk Magistrates Court. He spoke only to confirm his personal details and made no indication of a plea. A post-mortem examination revealed that Anne had died from a sustained compression to the neck. According to experts, Stephen had put Anne into a chokehold for a long period of time. A forensic pathologist said that Anne would have lost consciousness after about 15 seconds, and causing her death required further sustained pressure for a period of several minutes. Stephen told the police that he had been acting in self-defense. He said an argument had been sparked after the affair with Anastasia was brought up again, and had attacked him with a steak knife, and he struggled to fight her off. He said he was using one hand to try and disarm her and the other to restrain her, maintaining he had accidentally killed her in the process. Something police said they didn't believe at all. The investigators said Stephen was a self-centered narcissist caring for little else apart from himself. Detective Chief Superintendent Eamon Bridger said his team listened to the 999 call many times, and everything they thought about Stephen as a person was reflected very clearly in those 2 minutes. He spoke calmly, as if he was ordering some food, with no remorse or sadness, no angst or upset. This was amplified further when it turned out that Anne had actually died an hour before the phone call to police was made, and he hadn't bothered to contact anyone during that time. Stephen said, "Eventually she stopped struggling and I said, 'Thank fuck for that. I'm going to have a cigarette.' She didn't reply. I was expecting her to kick off again. When she didn't, I thought she had gone to bed and that it would be fine in the morning." He was still maintaining it was self-defense and continued with this argument in court, pleading not guilty for murder and hoping for a manslaughter conviction instead. In July 2018, a 7-day trial got underway. The prosecution were confident that they had enough to convince a jury that this was not self-defense. They argued that Anne would have been unconscious within about 20 seconds, and the way that Stephen had carried on despite the fact she wasn't responding was proof that he was intent on killing her in that moment. They said that he hadn't tried to revive his wife, he hadn't called an ambulance, and he hadn't even called the police until an hour later, by which point it was too late to do anything. And his cold and collected phone call to police painted a picture of someone that was not panicking, upset, or shaken up by what had happened. He simply didn't care. After just a few hours of deliberations, the jury rejected Stephen's self-defense argument and he was found guilty of murder. He was later sentenced to life with a minimum of 14 years to serve. Stephen sat emotionless as the sentence was read out. Stephen, Jr., gave a victim's impact statement and said, "The Surl family will never heal or recover from what had happened. I feel emotionally drained most days. It has taken its toll on me, my family, and friends. I have turned to alcohol as a release, which has affected my relationship with my wife and family, physically and emotionally. The relationship between me and my brothers has been torn apart. It has left a huge void in my heart, which is something I will never get over. Losing my mom has destroyed me. It has left me completely broken." The judge said he took into consideration Stephen's age, the fact that premeditation could not be proven, and the fact that he had just been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he said the minimum term of 14 years to serve reflected all of these factors. The judge said in part, "By your own hands, you have brought grief and distress untold upon your family. You have deprived your children of the mother that they loved. You have deprived your grandchildren of their grandmother, and you have deprived and of the remaining years of her life. I think that it must go without saying that your actions have caused devastating waves of pain and anguish to crash through your entire family. No sentence that I impose can ever undo that suffering." Detective Chief Superintendent Eamon Bridger said that their thoughts were with the family and stated, "Domestic abuse continues to take place behind closed doors. Suffolk Constabulary will take positive action against the perpetrators where we have the opportunity. When the victims of abuse come to us, we will work with them to address their needs and make them and their families safe. Our focus is firmly on the needs of victims, and we will continue to work closely with our partners in tackling this type of crime." The aftermath of what happened that December night is still widely felt in the small and close community. Stephen Jr. said he went to bed with both his parents, and in the space of a few hours they were both gone. The only comfort he takes is that the last time he saw his mother, she was so happy and joyful. The house was filled with laughter, and she was in the highest and most positive of spirits. Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. Priscilla Lewis faced numerous challenges growing up in a tough part of Port Costa, California, but she never let them diminish her ambition. A hardworking young woman, Priscilla was just 21 and already saving to buy her own house. Her bubbly, friendly personality made her well suited for her job as a waitress at Four Corners Pizza and Pasta in Crockett, California. On the night of September 24, 1996, Priscilla was working the evening shift at the pizza parlor. Shortly before closing, Priscilla took her last break and headed to a bar across the street to use the bathroom. There, she ran into her cousin, Troy Kinslow, who was having a drink. Afterward, she stepped outside to smoke a cigarette before returning to finish her shift. The cook at the restaurant, aware that Priscilla had gone on break, became concerned when she didn't return as closing time approached. He decided to check the bathroom to see if he could find her. In the bathroom, at approximately 10:30 p.m., he found Priscilla's body. Priscilla had been brutally attacked. She had been beaten, strangled, and drowned in the toilet. Her neck had been broken. While Priscilla had been a very friendly person, her best friend was also positive that she would have fought back against her killer. The restaurant where Priscilla worked was located in the rundown Bologna Square Mall, a former family-owned department store that, in 1996, was home to 4 other businesses in addition to the restaurant. All of the businesses shared a public bathroom in the building's dimly lit basement. The bathroom could be accessed by anyone, and 3 staircases led down to the basement. One of the staircases was directly behind Four Corners Pizza. The waitresses at the restaurant did not use the public bathroom because they thought the basement was creepy. They instead used the bathroom at the bar across the street, as Priscilla had done just prior to her murder. This led to speculation that someone had been lying in wait at the top of the staircase and dragged Priscilla downstairs. As she was returning to the police, executed several search warrants, conducted numerous interviews, and submitted pieces of evidence for forensic analysis. However, these efforts did not result in the identification of Priscilla's killer. Investigators did not give up on the case as years passed, however. in part due to the ongoing efforts of Priscilla's family. Priscilla had grown up with Troy Kinslow, the cousin she had seen shortly before she was killed. He had a difficult time dealing with Priscilla's murder and regularly contacted the police in the years following her death, making sure they were still focused on the case. When asked in 2019 what he wanted to say to Priscilla's killer, he replied, "We're going to get you. It might not be today, but these detectives are going to get you, and you're going to have to pay the price." 2 years later, Troy would be proven correct. On December 9th, 2021, the Contra Costa Sheriff's Office announced that 51-year-old Danny Lamont Hamilton had been charged with Priscilla's murder the day before, the events that ultimately led to the crime lab for examination. This resulted in DNA evidence being found and a profile being developed. The profile was a match to Hamilton. Hamilton's DNA profile was available to police because at the time of his identification, Hamilton was incarcerated at a state prison near San Diego, serving 295 years for unrelated sexual assault charges. He was initially taken into custody on those charges in 1999, 3 years after Priscilla's murder. Hamilton is being charged with 1 count of murder with 4 special enhancements in Priscilla's case. Priscilla's brother David was understandably disturbed to learn of Hamilton and the nature of his other crimes. He does believe that finally having answers in Priscilla's case will help his family heal, even though the arrest has opened up old emotional wounds that have never fully healed since his sister was murdered. He also hopes that DNA evidence will help solve other cases and provide answers to other families. In 1999, Minnie Soriano was a 13-year-old 7th grader at Middle School 135 in the Bronx, where she was a straight-A student. She had a bubbly and sweet personality. She was very helpful and mature, often helping take care of her younger sister, Nadia, and running errands and doing chores for her mother and stepfather. She was enterprising for her age, selling candy to the other residents of her apartment building. She loved poetry and wrote regularly in her journals, filling them with her own poems, school assignments, journal entries, and letters. On February 24, 1999, Minnie walked out of school with her friend Kimberly after dismissal. They parted ways because Kimberly had to go straight home and Minnie wanted to stop at the library before going to meet her younger sister after she finished school for the day. According to Kimberly, Minnie made a comment about being upset over something, but she did not ask her to elaborate on what was bothering her. Minnie was seen getting onto a city bus, wearing her backpack and a red jacket. At approximately 2:20 p.m., Minnie's routine was to take her bus back to her apartment building and then wait for her sister Nadia's bus to arrive so that she could walk the 7-year-old into the building. That day, she was not there waiting for Nadia. When Nadia gave up on waiting for her sister, she was able to find her way inside to their apartment. When she arrived home alone, her mother was immediately concerned. Minnie was a dedicated older sister who would never have left Nadia waiting outside alone. Minnie's mother and stepfather searched for her themselves before calling police to report her missing. The search for Minnie went on for several days until its tragic conclusion on February 28, 1999. That Sunday morning, a homeless man was going through the contents of dumpsters behind a video store 2 miles away from Minnie's apartment building. He found a particularly heavy black bag and opened it to see what was inside, only to discover Minnie's body. Minnie's body was in the fetal position, bound with green tape and wrapped inside the black garbage bag. The medical examiner did not find evidence of sexual assault, but the district attorney's office would later describe Minnie as being sexually abused, an assertion supported by the semen stains found on the front of the sweatshirt she was wearing. Minnie was found fully clothed, but her jacket and backpack were missing. The medical examiner determined Minnie had died of strangulation as the result of her neck being compressed, possibly while she was held in a chokehold. Minnie may have arrived at her apartment building as usual. A witness came forward reporting seeing her get off at the bus stop near her building on the afternoon she disappeared. Police canvassed the building, hoping to find further witnesses. They also feared that Minnie's killer may be another resident of the building, particularly in light of the fact that she sold candy door to door in the building, raising concerns that someone she met doing this may have developed an obsession with her. The DNA from the semen found on Minnie's sweatshirt was run through a national criminal database in 2000, but no match was found. It would be this DNA that would finally lead to an arrest in Minnie's case more than 22 years after her murder. On November 29, 2021, 49-year-old Joseph Martinez of New Rochelle, New York was arrested for Minnie's murder. The following day, he was arraigned on 2 counts of second murder, felony and intentional, in Bronx Supreme Court and remanded to custody. Martinez had been identified using familial DNA. Familial DNA is perhaps most well known for its use in identifying Lonnie David Franklin Jr. as the serial killer known as the Grim Sleeper in Los Angeles in 2010. The technique is used in cases where a direct match to an unknown DNA sample is not found in criminal databases. It looks for partial DNA matches in these databases instead, trying to identify any relatives of the contributor of the unknown DNA, potentially allowing authorities to greatly narrow down their pool of possible suspects. Minnie's case was the first cold case in which the technique led to the arrest of a suspect in New York City. The state of New York had authorized this technique to be used to attempt to identify suspects in criminal cases in 2017. Since then, the state had only approved the use of the technique in just 35 cases. Only 10 of these cases resulted in a match being located. Investigators are required to go through an extensive application process with the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services and the State Police Crime Lab in order to obtain authorization to submit samples for familial DNA testing. Investigators on Minnie's case first sought this authorization in 2018 after the case was re-examined by the Bronx Homicide Squad that February. Between the extensive authorization process and the detailed forensic work required by scientists at the crime lab, it will be 2 years before investigators had a lead to follow. In June of 2020, familial DNA testing identified a now deceased convicted offender in the criminal database as a partial match to the investigators then began looking into his family. Based on the amount of DNA shared by this offender and the man who left his DNA on Minnie's sweatshirt, they believed the man they were looking for was the son of the offender found in the database. Investigators learned that the offender found in the database had 5 sons and began researching to see if any of them could be the killer they were looking for. 2 of his sons were eliminated because of their age at the time of the murder. The lives of the other 3 were closely scrutinized to ascertain if any information, like their location at the time of the murder or any physical impediments, could exclude them as a possible suspect. While re-examining their case files in light of the new information provided by the familial DNA testing, investigators learned that one of the 3 potential suspects had lived in the same building as Minnie and had been interviewed in the early days of the investigation as a part of the canvassing of the building. This individual was Joseph Martinez, who was 27 years old at the time of the murder. Police were able to surreptitiously collect a discarded DNA sample from Martinez. Testing of that sample showed that Martinez's DNA was a match to the DNA from the semen found on Minnie's sweatshirt. Martinez voluntarily met with police to be interviewed about the case. During this interview, he denied ever having physical contact with Minnie. Martinez pleaded not guilty to the charges against him in court and maintained his innocence to the press through his lawyer. He has no criminal record and is the father of 2 daughters. Martinez is a street astronomer who would set up a telescope on the street and give astronomy lessons to passersby, particularly children. He had an active social media presence and was known as Jupiter Joe. According to his website, he had been scheduled to be at a playground in the Bronx with his telescope 3 days after his arrest. In an unsettling coincidence, Minnie had an interest in astronomy. She told some of her friends she wanted to be an astronaut, and one of her journals contains a long list of astronomy websites she liked to visit. When asked about the arrest in his daughter's case, Minnie's father, Luis Soriano Duran, who now lives in Texas, was happy there was finally progress in the case, but sad that it took so long. Everywhere we go, we see a little kid. I remember her. When somebody smiles like she did, it makes me remember her. She always was in our heart and in our mind. I hope that justice will do its work. This time, do it on time and right, he told NBC New York. When asked about the man charged with his daughter's murder, Mr. Soriano Duran replied, "I wish him to go to hell." Martinez is due back in court on March 7, 2022. Mary Romik was born in Czechoslovakia in August of 1908 and came to the United States with her family when she was 8 years old. The family settled in Owasso, Michigan, and Mary attended St. Paul's School until she reached the 8th grade when she dropped out so she could help put her siblings through school. Mary got married in 1951 to a man named Leonard Pryor, and the couple settled in Flint, Michigan. Mary had learned to make candy as a child and added on to her house at Chippewa and Louisa Streets in Flint so that she could open up the Sweet Marie's candy shop. Due to rising violence in Flint, Mary and Leonard eventually decided to sell the candy store and retire. They moved to the small village of Lennon, Michigan, which they believed would be a safer location. Leonard passed away in 1992. Mary remained at their home in Lennon with her beloved dog, Pupsy, who frequently accompanied Mary on her walks. According to her family, Mary was a sweet woman with a wacky sense of humor who was always kind and generous. By 1997, 88-year-old Mary was a creature of habit. She was a devout Catholic who attended Mass 6 days a week and walked to the same diner for lunch and dinner almost every day. Her brother-in-law, James, would give her a ride to church each day. On February 27, 1997, however, Mary was not at her home when he arrived to pick her up. The door to the house was open and her dog Pupsy was still inside, but there was no sign of Mary. James went to the church to see if Mary had just found a ride with someone else, but she was not there. He checked the diner she frequented as well, but could not find her. He reported her missing around noon. Canine teams with the Michigan State Police were luckily in the area at the time for a training exercise and were sent to Mary's house to help with the search for her. Approximately 2 hours after Mary Pryor was reported missing, a state trooper and a canine officer located her body wrapped in a blanket in a swampy, wooded area 150 yards away from her house. Mary's autopsy would reveal that she had been suffocated and beaten about the head. She appeared to have been raped, a conclusion later confirmed by DNA evidence. Police spent years conducting interviews and following up on leads, but were unable to make an arrest. Mary was not forgotten by her small community, and billboards were put up and door hangers were distributed to houses over the following decades. Shortly after the murder, the community was able to collect $20,000 to offer as a reward for information that led to the conviction of Mary's killer, but the money was eventually returned to the donors after years passed with no one coming forward to claim it. Just months before the 25th anniversary of Mary's murder, on November 11, 2021, Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson announced that an arrest had been made in the case. 41-year-old Michael Burr of Lennon, Michigan had been charged on single counts of felony murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, and kidnapping in connection to Mary's murder. Burr was just 17 years old and a junior in high school at the time Mary was killed. He had long been considered a potential suspect by investigators because his home was so close to Mary's. Sheriff Swanson had been assigned to Mary's case in 2002 when he was a captain with the sheriff's office, and he interviewed Burr as part of his investigation in 2004. A DNA sample was collected from Burr in 1997 and kept in storage, and biological samples from Mary's autopsy were preserved. Other items connected to the case have also been submitted for DNA testing in the years since the murder. While the sheriff's office has had access to Burr's DNA for decades, according to Sheriff Swanson, the DNA match was not made until the day before Burr was arrested. The biological material collected from the crime scene is a 1 in 1.9 octillion match for Burr. Sheriff Swanson has discussed scientific advances contributing to Burr's identification, but it is unclear what those advances are. Because of the ongoing legal proceedings against Burr, the sheriff's office and the prosecutor have only been able to speak publicly about the evidence against Burr in very broad terms, so further details about the DNA match are not available. There is other evidence prosecutors plan to use in court, including drag mark evidence, as well as a witness who provided a statement several years ago and is still available to testify in court. However, like the DNA techniques used in the case, this evidence will only be detailed to the public as the legal proceedings against Burr progress. I didn't think this was ever going to be solved. I just felt that way, and I am so pleased and so happy that Aunt Mary is going to get the justice she deserves. Emily Dubé, Mary's niece, said following Burr's arrest. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olsen was the youngest of 3 children, living with her mother, Patty, in the small rural town of St. Martin's, Missouri, which had just over 1,000 residents. Elizabeth was passionate about theater and performing and had recently been cast in the school play, a role she was excitedly diving into. She practiced her lines daily with anyone willing to play the other parts, rehearsed her songs, and often asked her siblings to join her in acting. Elizabeth would find any reason to dress up and sing along to Hannah Montana and Taylor Swift. Known for her sweet, innocent, and kind-hearted nature, she was friendly, caring, and always looked out for those around her. Elizabeth shared a close bond with her mother, Patty, and they loved to bake together and play puzzles and games. On October 21, 2009, a typical Wednesday, everyone was home from school, and dinner was nearly ready. Elizabeth's friend, Emma, came to the door, asking if Elizabeth could come out to play. Patty initially said no, as it was a school night and dinner was almost done. But after her daughter heard Emma at the door, both girls were relentless in trying to go out together, jumping up and down and begging for Patty to let them go. Emma lived just 4 houses away, and the pair and their other siblings were at each other's homes a lot. Patty told Elizabeth she had 1 hour and no more, and she wanted her home by 6:15 p.m. Elizabeth was still not home, and it was 15 minutes past the agreed time, which for a child as conscientious as Elizabeth was a reason to be concerned. The sun was setting, and Patty said there was no way her daughter would still be out voluntarily, as she was terrified of the dark. Patty called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She then rang Emma's grandmother Karen, whom Emma and her siblings lived with. To her horror, Karen said she hadn't seen Elizabeth either, and she had no idea that Emma had even knocked at her door that afternoon. Patty hung up straight away and called the police. By 6:30, officers were at Patty's house and combing through the area. The street the family lived on was very close to about 60 acres of woodland, and this was a huge yet overwhelming focus for the search teams. The police headed over to Emma's house, but they all maintained she hadn't been there. Karen and Gary, Emma's grandparents, were so upset they had no idea this had all happened, but they simply couldn't give any information that would help. All they could do was join in the search, despite the fact their houses were connected by the street, which would have only taken a few minutes to walk. Emma said they had been walking through and around the woods and had been darting in and out of the neighboring lawns and backyards. She said an hour later, the incredibly diligent Elizabeth set off home as instructed. Emma said she watched her walk off, and that was the last time she had seen her. Officers said they still couldn't see any evidence that pointed towards foul play or anything untoward, suggesting maybe she had become lost in the woods, to which Patty replied, "She's 9 years old. She wouldn't just walk off by herself." Soon, almost a third of the whole town was out and looking, but the search party eventually had to slow down and stop for the night because of how dark it was. As soon as the sun rose, they were out in force again. A few hours later, with the concern continuing to mount, the FBI was called in to help, and they moved quickly. Registered sex offenders in the area were all interviewed. Each car coming in and out was stopped and searched, dive teams and helicopters were deployed, and sniffer dogs were brought in too. The team started looking at Elizabeth's phone activity and ordered the information from her cell phone provider. The data arrived quickly and showed that her phone was still on and was actually pinging near her home and in the woods. It was now 24 hours later, a painfully long amount of time when dealing with a missing child. There were no items of clothing found, no dropped phone, no clues at all. Unfortunately, when they were searching the location that linked to her phone battery suddenly went dead and the ping stopped. The forest was dense, dark, damp and cold, and there was a huge amount of ground to cover. The more time that was passing, the less likely it was seeming that they were going to have a positive outcome in the search for Elizabeth. Elizabeth's phone records also came back, and they were able to look at her last contacts and messages, as well as her mother Patty and several others that could be easily accounted for. She had received a call that afternoon from someone called Alyssa. 6-year-old Emma then asked to talk to the police again. She now had a new story, but seemed scared to tell the detectives. She said that her half-sister had been the one to get her to knock on Elizabeth's door that afternoon. Her half-sister was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. Emma said that when the two were outside playing together, Alyssa came and joined them, and encouraged Emma to leave them alone. But Elizabeth said she had to head home and started walking off. This timed perfectly with the call that came from Alyssa. Emma walked back to her house and stayed outside playing alone, leaving Elizabeth and Alyssa out together. A while later, Emma, who was now back in her garden, fell over and caught herself on some thorns. She called out for help. Alyssa heard her from her bedroom and came outside. Emma said as she was helping her, she noticed something that looked like blood on Alyssa's clothes. Detectives asked Alyssa a few routine questions, and despite the fact she seemed open and forthcoming, something about what Emma had told them wasn't sitting right. If what Emma was saying was true, it meant that she hadn't been the last person to see Elizabeth that day. As far as they now knew, it was actually 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. It was now 48 hours later, and the investigating team had to regroup. It was now glaringly obvious that Elizabeth had not run away. She had either been led somewhere or forced somewhere, and officers started looking closer to home. As they began doing rounds of the houses again, a search party inside the woods made a strange discovery. A group of volunteers had stumbled upon a huge hole that had been dug up then covered back over. They alerted police right away, but there was nothing under the soil. There was still no sign of Elizabeth or anything belonging to her in that area. When detectives had been at the Bustamante house talking to Emma and Alyssa, they had noticed several holes in the garden that looked similar in size and shape to this one. Given this, a warrant was issued to properly and intensely search the home. Although Elizabeth definitely hadn't been there that day, she would often go over and play, so they needed to take a good look around. Everything seemed normal and in order until they entered Elisa's room. Painted a very troubling and chilling picture. Everything was everywhere and there was writing all over the walls, some parts in blood. There was also a drawing of an outline of a person with the name Emma next to it, her 6-year-old sister. Cards from her father, who was in prison, were scattered around the room. And, buried under everything, detectives found Alyssa's diary. One entry read, "If I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's gonna die." They also noticed a paragraph that was scribbled over in blue pen. Fortunately, investigators were able to uncover some of the original writing by shining a light on the back of the paper. 2 words stood out: slit and throat. Despite Alyssa saying she had been at school that day, it would turn out she had actually skipped lessons, and her whereabouts around the time Elizabeth was last seen, as Emma was saying goodbye to her, weren't able to be confirmed by anyone either. Things were slowly being pieced together, but there were still so many gaps. Alyssa's diary was seized by the FBI and handed over to Sergeant David Rice, who was now preparing to interview the teen. Born in 1994, Alyssa came from a troubled and very broken family. Both her parents had substance addictions, her father was in and out of prison, and her mother would often leave the family home on drug sponges. Eventually, Alyssa and her siblings went to live with her grandparents, Karen and Gary, who soon gained full custody of them. Karen said she adored Alyssa, and although the children had had a tough life, she did her best to raise them well, shower them with love and care, and be a constant and supportive presence in their lives. As she entered her teenage years, Alyssa started self-harming and expressing suicidal feelings. She was admitted into a psychiatric hospital after she overdosed and began to cut words into her arms. Doctors that assessed her described her as violent and angry. She was diagnosed with severe depression and prescribed antidepressants. When she was released, things only began to get worse and more concerning. On her various social media platforms, she changed her list of hobbies to killing people and cutting. She often told friends and her boyfriend she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone and had a dream of burning down a house with a family inside. Her Twitter feed talked about a hatred of authority and people telling her what to do. One of her posts read, "Bad decisions make great stories." She also posted a video to her YouTube channel called "Idiots Getting Electrocuted by Electric Fence." The video showed her trying to get her 2 brothers to touch a fence that she knew would electrocute them. A disturbing pattern of behavior was clear to see, and the more the FBI looked into her background, the more they found pointed towards her being a dangerous individual that wanted to inflict pain on people in the worst ways imaginable. After going through her diary some more, Sergeant Rice asked Alyssa to come in for a formal interview, alongside her grandmother and a juvenile officer. He said as the interview progressed, his tactic was to ask a question and sit in silence for as long as possible, sometimes for up to a minute at a time. He said as uncomfortable as it was, he knew the team would break eventually if there was something to say, which he was certain there was. He needed to know what had happened to Elizabeth that day, and he wasn't going to stop until he got to the truth. Alyssa started off by recounting her day. She said she had come back from school at around 3:30 and then had gone for a walk in the forest at around 4:30, 5 p.m. They now knew. She was never at school that day, so she was already trapping herself in lies. She said she was supposed to take Emma on a walk with her, but ditched her as she was annoying and instead went walking alone. She claimed she had come back about an hour later and was up in her room when she heard Emma shouting for help from outside. Sergeant Rice got her to retrace her steps with a map he had printed out. Alyssa said after this, everybody went to church and got home at around 8 p.m. Rice then changed the line of questioning and moved on to the holes around her garden and around the woods. Alyssa calmly admitted to having dug them herself, but said it was because she liked digging holes and sometimes buried dead animals in them. He then said, "What kind of person do you think would do this to a 9-year-old girl?" Alyssa shrugged and said, "I dunno, a sick person, someone that can put down all their morals." She was still maintaining that she had never been out with Elizabeth on her own. It was always in a group of siblings, and she had been trying her best to help find her as well. After this, he started asking questions about Elizabeth's phone, explaining that the data did not lie, and it was indicating that her phone was somewhere behind Alyssa's house, which he showed her on a map. He then moved on to Alyssa's house and her bedroom. When Rice confronted her about the entries, including the one that had been scribbled over, the interview would take a drastic turn. Alyssa said the pair had been playing out in the forest, and Elizabeth had fallen, hit her head, and died instantly. Panicked, she had tried to conceal her body by burning it. But, given the final entry in her diary, Reese knew this wasn't true. But it was the start of the truth coming out. He just had to keep chipping away and poking holes in her stories. The entry in her diary that had been scribbled over had now been completely uncovered, and it read as follows: "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throats and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the oh my god, I can't do this feeling. It's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." It had been written on the same day Elizabeth had gone missing. October 21st, Rice told her they would find Elizabeth's body eventually, and when they did, an autopsy would tell them the full story. Alyssa told Rice that she had bumped into Elizabeth and Emma outside, and once Emma had gone, everything started to unravel. Despite her denials, it was pre-planned. She was already armed with a kitchen knife. Holding the 9-year-old's hand, the pair walked for 15 minutes, deep into the forest, with Alyssa telling her she had something to show her. They just had to walk further in. Once they reached a certain spot, Alyssa said she beat and strangled her before slitting her throat and stabbing her repeatedly. The fear that Elizabeth must have felt as the forest got darker and she realized her life was in danger is unimaginable. Alyssa then said she had attempted to burn her body before digging a hole to bury her and disposing of everything else in the creek. However, Rice knew that the hole had not been dug on that day, it had been dug days before, as were all the other holes they had found. She didn't go out there with a shovel or anything she could have used to do this, and there was no way she could have killed Elizabeth, dug a hole to bury her, and been back home within the hour to go to church. If Rice could get her to admit to pre-digging the hole, it would help to prove premeditation. Everybody still found it hard to believe that Alyssa had managed to do this all by herself. But she swore it was just her, and she was the only one that knew about it. Alyssa Bustamante agreed to take Rice to her remains, and with this, just 15 minutes from her home, the search for Elizabeth Olten came to a devastating end. A day after Elizabeth was found, police announced that they had placed the 15-year-old under arrest, and she had been charged with first-degree murder. The neighborhood was horrified. Police had also interviewed Elisa's boyfriend and asked him to undertake a polygraph test. Although they suspected he likely knew something had happened, they determined he didn't have anything to do with the murder of Elizabeth, and he was never implicated in anything. Other than the fact she had just wanted to know what it was like to kill someone, given her diary entry, there was no other explanation. She had dug 2 graves in the weeks before and essentially waited for an opportunity. It remains undetermined who, if anyone, the second grave was intended for, but police suspected she was actually planning to kill her 2 younger brothers. On October 28th, a week after she had gone missing, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten was laid to rest. Her favorite color was pink, and her funeral was filled with the color. A horse-drawn carriage carried her pink and white casket. The community was a close one, and it was packed with people standing along the sides and waiting outside. The emergency responders and investigators were also sat in the first several rows. The case had deeply affected and moved everybody. In November 2009, despite her lawyers pushing for her to get a lesser charge, on the grounds of a troubled childhood and her age, the judge ruled that Alyssa Bustamante would be tried as an adult, and she was therefore indicted. She entered a plea of not guilty, and trial preparation got underway. Just as Elizabeth's family and the prosecution thought they were finally getting somewhere, a huge blow came. In June 2011, her defense team requested that her lengthy confession to Sergeant Rice was thrown out. A judge ruled that because of her age and the line of questioning put forward by the juvenile officer working alongside Rice, at least part of her statement would not be admissible in court. After this, her trial was delayed and set for early 2012. The prosecution knew they were really up against it, and after going back and forth, thinking of the best approach, they decided to offer the option of a plea deal to Alyssa, second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder. With this, Alyssa Bustamante withdrew her not guilty plea for first-degree murder and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder instead. This also spared her the chances of receiving the death penalty. The courtroom was packed, and everybody wanted to know what would happen. As part of the deal, Alyssa had to recount what had happened that day. As she went through what she had done, in all its awful detail, reporters in the court said the tension was palpable, with everybody sitting in stunned silence. Her defense team also spoke and leaned heavily on her childhood and upbringing, mental health issues, and claiming that her prescribed medication made her more prone to violence. Despite all of this, Alyssa Bustamante was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder and 30 years for armed criminal action, and the sentences were to be served consecutively. Several months after she pleaded guilty, however, the United States Supreme Court ruled that juveniles cannot face automatic life sentences without the possibility of parole. So, under Missouri's law, Alyssa may seek parole after 30 years. Patty gave a speech at her sentencing. She was so upset and physically shaking. The judge eventually asked her to stop talking. All Alyssa could say in response was, "I cannot even understand what you guys are going through," adding that she would give her life to bring Elizabeth back. A detective said it was in this moment Karen and Gary got up and walked out of the courtroom, and everybody could see Alyssa suddenly realize that the only 2 people that had stuck by her and tried to be a constant in her life had just walked away. Patty said that everything that came out of Alyssa's mouth was a lie. She had no remorse, and she was being told what to say by her lawyers. The prosecutor Mark Richardson said he had never seen anything like this in his life, and he hoped to never have to try a case like it again. The motive has to be the most senseless, reprehensible that could be in humankind, and that is to take a life for a thrill, he said. A forensic psychologist added it was clear from her patterns of behavior over the years. It was only a matter of time before she killed somebody. Patty went on to sue not only Alyssa, but the hospital where Alyssa sought treatment. She believes that the healthcare system should have seen the red flags and taken preventative measures. A judge threw out the lawsuit against the hospital, but the lawsuit against Alyssa was successful, and she will ultimately owe Patty $5 million. Alyssa appealed her sentence in 2014, but this was denied. The events that transpired so very quickly on October 21, 2009 rocked the town and shattered the closeness of the community. Patty said she misses her daughter's kindness and her ability to see the good in everyone and everything. A friendly and innocent young girl, excited for her starring role in the school play, just playing with her friends and siblings, enjoying the simple pleasures that childhood brings. Her life was snatched away in the most frightening way imaginable, and the damage done to so many people on that day will forever be felt. In 2021, 59-year-old François Barov was residing in La Grande Motte on the southern coast of France. On September 27th, he informed his wife that he was heading to a vacation rental property they owned in Grab du Roy to meet new tenants. After kissing her goodbye, he left on his bicycle, but he never returned. When his wife checked his computer, she discovered that no one had rented the property. She reported him missing, and his whereabouts remained unknown for 2 days. On September 29th, his body was found in the rental property, accompanied by 2 notes. One note claimed his death was a suicide, asking that he not be resuscitated if his attempt left him in a coma. In the other, Barov confessed to committing horrific crimes and murdering innocent people. A DNA test from his body confirmed that Barov was the notorious, unidentified serial killer Legrelli, who had eluded authorities for 35 years. Legrelli was believed to be responsible for 3, possibly 4, murders and 6 rapes between 1986 and 1994. His first known victim was Cécile Bloch, an 11-year-old who lived with her parents and older half-brother in Paris's 19th district. Cécile was a gifted student and talented violinist who had played with a youth orchestra for several years. She was set to transfer to a specialized school in early 1987, where she could pursue her studies alongside her conservatory training. Monday, May 5, 1986 started out as an ordinary day at the family's apartment. Cécile's parents left for work at 8:10, and her half-brother, Luc, who was doing advanced studies in biology at the time, left 5 minutes later. Cécile would leave for her morning classes at 8:40. Cécile's routine was to return home for lunch at noon before returning to school. Her mother, Suzanne, would call home to check on her. On May 5th, however, Cécile did not answer the phone as usual. Suzanne waited a few minutes before making a second call, which also went unanswered. She then called Cécile's school and learned that her daughter had never made it to class that morning. Both of Cécile's parents then rushed home to look for Cécile. When they arrived, Cécile was not there, but her school bag was not either, meaning that she left for class but did not arrive there for some reason. Cécile's parents enlisted the help of one of the building's caretakers to search for her. Around 3 p.m., the caretaker was searching a utility room on the 3rd level of the basement when he discovered Cécile's body underneath a piece of discarded carpet. Cécile had been raped, strangled, and stabbed once. Her body was also marked by scratches and bruises, indicating how fiercely Cécile had fought against her killer. Police quickly had a potential suspect for the horrific crime. Several witnesses, including Cécile's parents and her half-brother Luc, saw an unfamiliar man in the building, both on the elevator and in the parking lot, one level above where Cécile's body would later be found, between 7:50 and 9:20 that morning. Luc in particular got a good look at this man and had reason to remember him. That morning, he rode the elevator with a stranger as he headed out for the day. He remembered him not only because he did not recognize him from the building, but also because he was unusually friendly for someone he did not know. Luc assumed the man was just visiting someone else in the building and therefore thought it was unusual when the stranger told him that he hoped he had a very, very good day as Luc exited the elevator. Luc described the unknown man as being between 25-30 years old and just under 6 feet tall. He also reported that the stranger's face had very textured skin, either from pockmarks or acne scars. This detail would lead to the moniker the killer would be given while his identity remained unknown, Legrelli or the pockmarked man. A composite of the suspect was generated but did not lead to the identification of Cécile's killer. Her case was closed and reopened several times with numerous individuals re-examining the details of the case, but Cécile's family remained frustrated with the progress of the investigation. After completing his studies, Luc became a geneticist and pushed for authorities in France to use DNA technology in his half-sister's case, as authorities in the United Kingdom and Belgium had begun doing in some of their investigations. It would take years, but eventually, semen found on Cécile's body was submitted for DNA testing and a profile was developed. This profile would ultimately link the pockmarked man to 3 other rapes and 2 other murders. The first crime DNA tied him to was the rape of an 8-year-old girl called Sarah, which occurred the month before Cécile was killed. Sarah entered the elevator in her apartment building on the morning of April 7, 1986. A man was already inside of the elevator and pretended to press the button for the first floor for her. Instead, the elevator went down to the 4th level of the basement where the man pushed her out of the elevator. He pulled her over to a mattress and punched her twice as she struggled to get away. He stuffed a rag in her mouth, raped her, strangled her, and left her for dead. Luckily, she was only rendered unconscious and woke up approximately 15 minutes later after her attacker had fled. The same DNA was also found at a double murder which occurred shortly before the 1st anniversary of Cecile's murder. 20-year-old Umgard Muller was from Germany but was living in Paris, working as an hauteur and studying geography. Her employers were 38-year-old Gilles Balletier and his wife. Gilles was an airline mechanic who worked nights while his wife worked during the day. On April 29, 1987, Umgard, who lived in a maid's apartment not far from the Polity family's apartment, arrived to take their daughter to school at 8:45 a.m. Mrs. Polity then left for work. Her husband had not yet returned home from his overnight shift at work. She would not see him again until 7 o'clock that evening when she would discover his body when she returned home. Gilles' body was in a position called a Spanish tourniquet by the authorities. He was on his stomach with his arms behind his back. His arms, legs, and neck were all connected with various ties and pieces of fabric from within the apartment. The various pieces were tightened with a poker from the fireplace, and he would have suffocated slowly. Mrs. Poulatier then found Umgard's body in her daughter's room. Umgard was mostly nude and tied up to the bunk bed in the room. She had been strangled from a bathrobe and her throat had been cut. Both Gilles and Hermgård's bodies had been burned with cigarettes and showed superficial knife wounds, indicating that they had been tortured. The Polite's daughter was thankfully not at the apartment. The parents of one of her friends had taken her home with them when Irmgard failed to pick her up at school. DNA would be found inside Irmgard and on a cigarette but found inside the apartment. Both samples matched the DNA from Cecile and Sarah's crime scenes. 2 cameras were stolen from the apartment, and Polaroid paper found at the scene indicated the killer may have photographed his crime. It is possible that Umgard actually knew her killer. A man was seen at her residence the day before and the day of her murder and was seen having a heated discussion with her. According to witnesses, he had severe acne scars, raising the possibility that he was the pockmarked man. If this is the case, it means these 2 murders could have had a different motive than Cecile's murder and Sarah's rape. The next crime tied to the pockmarked man through his DNA occurred on October 27, 1987. A 14-year-old named Mary and returned to the apartment building where she lived with her mother from school for her lunch break. A man followed her into the elevator and told her he was a police officer and needed to see her identity documents. He showed her he had a gun and a holster under his jacket and demanded to see her arms to check them for track marks, claiming he was investigating drug trafficking. He continued making threats against her and asking her questions about her mother and her schedule. Now knowing she would not be at home, he forced Mary inside her apartment and tied her up, threatening her with a letter opener while asking about valuables in the home. He gathered 2 cameras, a VCR, a CD player, and 14 CDs into a bag before coming back to Mary and then raping her. The man tried to wipe his semen off of Mary Ann's body, but some of it would be found on the bedding. In 1997, a DNA profile was developed from it and found to be a match to the pockmarked man. The final crime where the pockmarked man's DNA was occurred in 1994. Unlike his other crimes, it did not occur in Paris, instead beginning in Maitremory and concluding in Sa-Cle. On June 29th, an 11-year-old called Ingrid took a shortcut as she rode her bicycle home after playing with her friends. As she rode down an isolated dirt road, a car pulled up in front of her and blocked her path. The driver exited the car and told Ingrid that he was a policeman, briefly flashing a tricolor card, a type of identification card issued to law enforcement officers to her. He told Ingrid that she was not allowed to be riding her bike on that road and asked her for her identification documents. She did not have them with her, so he told her he would have to take her to the police station. The man handcuffed Ingrid and put her in his car, refusing to let her stop at home to tell her family where she was going. Instead of taking her to the police station, the man drove to Sa-Cle, more than 60 kilometers away. He took Ingrid into an abandoned farmhouse, where he raped her. Ingrid spoke to him the entire time, a fact to which she would later attribute her survival. Her attacker again wiped away his semen from her body. He did not have a chance to dispose of the tissue, however, because he left Ingrid at the farmhouse, telling her he was going to get food but would be right back. Ingrid was able to escape during his absence and came across a class from a local motorcycle school. The instructor took her to the gendarmerie in RC, and evidence from the farmhouse house was quickly collected. In addition to the crimes with DNA evidence, the pockmarked man is also suspected in other crimes based on the circumstances surrounding them. In 2015, police software that analyzes the elements of various crimes led to the pockmarked man also being suspected in the murder of Corinne Leroy, who disappeared in Meaux while walking to school on June 9, 1994, 10 days before her 20th birthday. Her body was discovered near the edge of a forest by people out on a walk on July 12. While DNA evidence has not been found tying her death to the pockmarked man, her body was found, bound in the same distinctive manner as Gillis Polity. Corinne also disappeared just 20 days before Ingrid was kidnapped and, like in Ingrid's case, also disappeared from outside of Paris, where the pockmarked man's earlier known crimes were all committed. She also disappeared from a main road where a struggle would have been noticed, indicating that she most likely got into someone's car willingly, either because she knew them or perhaps because her killer had told her he was a police officer as well. The pockmarked man was believed to have committed 6 rapes between 1986 and 1994, as well as numerous other attempted attacks. For example, on November 26, 1987, for young women between the ages of 14-19 reported being approached in their apartment buildings by a man with a tricolor card claiming to be a police officer and demanding to see their identity documents. Luckily, in these 4 cases, the girls either got away on their own or their parent or some other trusted adult unexpectedly arrived to assist them. The incidents all occurred right after each other, with 2 of them occurring within the same building, as though the man spontaneously tried approaching victims of opportunity after each failed attempt to gain control over a girl. The incidents were either suspicious or upsetting enough for all of the girls to report them to the authorities. The 4 girls, as well as 5 adults who interacted the man, identified him as the man pictured in a composite image of the man who raped Mary and just a month earlier, tying the pockmarked man to these incidents. Several of the adults who had interacted with this man speculated that he was only pretending to be a police officer as, despite the identification card he flashed, he did not seem to have the confidence or composure of an actual police officer. However, as years went on without the pockmarked man being identified, investigators became more and more convinced that his claims of being a member of law enforcement were not just part of a ruse. Certain details did point to the pockmarked man being either a police officer or a gendarme, a member of France's military police. Some circumstances seem to make the latter possibility the more likely, such as his vocabulary, the types of knots he tied, and the tactics he used, as well as the proximity of gendarmerie facilities to some of his crimes. He also seemed to have some sense of forensics, making some attempts to prevent leaving behind DNA before the average member of the public would have understood its forensic value and wiping down items at crime scenes that would have had his fingerprints. He was obviously not always successful in removing all of the forensic evidence, but the absence of such evidence at some crime scenes has prevented them from conclusively being tied to him. The possibility that the pockmarked man truly had been a gendarme led to an investigating magistrate opening a massive effort to search for the killer amongst their ranks. In 2021, 750 men, who had been gendarmes in the Paris region at the time of the crimes, were ordered to report for questioning and to provide a DNA sample. Fariv learned he had been ordered to report through his wife, who used his old cell phone number. On September 24, 2021, she told him that she had just received a phone call meant to inform her husband that he had to report in 5 days and instructing him to call back to receive a time for his appointment. She told him that the commander who called said that the summons was in relation to a reopened investigation relating to events that occurred between 1986 and 1992. She would later say that she noticed no change in his mood or behavior when he received this news. He left home 3 days later and was found dead of a suicide by overdose on the day he was due to report for questioning. Farouf served as a gendarme stationed in the cavalry of the Republican Guard between 1983 and 1988. He went on to become a member of the police force until a motorcycle accident forced him into early retirement in 2014. Between 1993 and 2000, He lived in Lanfrey, a 15-minute drive from the site of Ingrid's abduction and a 30-minute drive from where Corinne Leroy went missing. According to Veroff's wife, who had been married to him since 1985, they had a harmonious marriage and her husband never got angry. His identification as the pockmarked man also shocked his neighbors, who described him as a helpful, normal neighbor. He has been described as a typical police officer who acted professionally and had a good sense of humor. However, he did have mental health struggles in the later half of the 1990s which required him to take time off and seek treatment. The second suicide note, which was addressed to Veroff's wife, has not been released to the public in full. It has been reported that he did not provide details about the crimes which he acknowledged committing. He blamed his crimes on impulses that stemmed from events in his childhood and claimed that his wife and children were the reason he gained control over them and stopped killing. He claimed to have committed suicide to protect his family, knowing that his crimes were about to become public. It has also been reported that Veroff claimed to have committed no crimes after 1997 in the letter. This is concerning because the last crime attributed to the pockmarked man occurred in 1994. Investigators are currently looking into more than 20 crimes, trying to ascertain if Veroff had any involvement in them. Dulce Maria Alavez was born in April 2014. Her mother, Noma, was very young at the time, just 14 years old. So Dulce was primarily cared for by Noma's mother, Norma, who later became Dulce's legal guardian. Though her family was close-knit, her father, Edgar Perez, was deported to Mexico in 2018. Noma described Dulce as spunky yet sweet, always sharing hugs and kisses. Dulce was a loving child who adored the Disney movie Frozen and loved pretending to be a princess. Noma went on to have a second child, a boy named Manny, and by 2019, she was expecting her third. On September 16, 2019, Noma waited at her mother's house for her daughter and younger sister to get off the school bus together. Dulce had recently started kindergarten and was adjusting to her new routine. Once they arrived, Noma, Dulce, Noma's 3-year-old son Manny, and her younger sister decided to spend some time at Bridgeton City Park. Before getting there, at around 4 p.m., they stopped in a gas station to get some ice cream. CCTV showed the family in the store. Dulce was seen wearing white trousers with butterflies and flowers on them, white sandals, and a yellow shirt with a koala on it. They then drove 5 minutes to Bridgerton City Park. After pulling into a parking space beside the basketball courts, Dulce and Manny got out and ran over towards the playground to go on the swings, roughly 30 yards away. Noma, who was 5 months pregnant, would normally take the family dog too and go to the playground with her children. But on this occasion, she did not. She stayed in the car with her younger sister who was doing her homework and scratched a lottery ticket. Although they could see the park, the swings were obscured by a hill. The fact as to exactly what happened next is unclear, as it was reported that at around 4:20 p.m., Manny ran back to the car without his sister. But Noma would later say he had not ran back to the car. She said they could no longer see Manny or Dulce from the vehicle. So she and her younger sister got out of the car and went to go and look. She said they had found Manny crying with his ice cream on the floor. She asked him where his sister was, and he pointed to the buildings by the park. Initially believing she was playing hide and seek, Emma went looking, but there was no sign of her daughter. Before calling 911, Noma called her brother who lived close by and asked him to come out with the dog to see if they could find her. But there was still no sign of Dulce. She asked the children on the basketball courts if they had seen her, and she said that one of them had told her they had seen Dulce running towards the buildings and an African-American man walking near the buildings at that time. This differed from what another girl at the basketball courts had said. She said she had seen what appeared to be a red van and a Hispanic man nearby. Noma said that she had seen 2 children in the park, alongside the children who were playing basketball. I saw 2 kids the same age as my daughter and son coming out. They were holding hands, but I didn't see no grown-up with them. They just went around the park. And then I saw the girls at the basketball court. And that's it. She then called the police. Within minutes, the police had arrived on scene. Dog handlers were also there to assist in the search with bloodhounds, and they scoured through the park and wooded areas, hoping that maybe the little girl had just wandered off or become lost. The task in front of them was huge. Bridgeton City Park sits on roughly 1,000 acres of land in Cumberland County and was just behind Bridgeton High School. In the time frame of Dulce's disappearance, Bridgeton Police Chief Michael Gamari Sr. said that around 400 vehicles had been close to or around the park during that time. There were no CCTV cameras in the playground, but the police chief said other videos had confirmed she was in the park, as it had been around 45 minutes from her going missing to the police being called. He said the scope of the investigation had widened. The FBI Child Abduction Division were also brought on board to assist local law enforcement in the investigation. The community response was huge. Volunteers from the local community used their knowledge of the area to assist in the search for the missing child. The park had not been immediately closed off, and the locals soon descended to try and help. If she had been abducted, and the abductor had walked to the playground to get her, there was a possibility of footprints being left. But when people began arriving at the park to look for her, any potential footprints could have been compromised or destroyed, as would any potential tire tracks. The following day, September 17th, the police described a van they were looking for, a red vehicle with sliding doors and tinted windows. The description of the van had come from a child, meaning there was a potential for the description to not be accurate. It had now been roughly 28 hours since Dulce had last been seen, and at 10 p.m. that night, an Amber Alert was issued. An Amber Alert is issued when a child is suspected to have been abducted. It circulates a name and description of the child in question, and any details about the potential abductor. Former FBI Special Agent J.J. Claver said it would have been better to have the Amber Alert go out within hours of Dulce going missing and not the following day. As the park was popular with people and was a place where people would go jogging and work out, the FBI believed that her abductor was likely familiar with the area and knew it well enough to avoid being seen. FBI Special Agent Daniel Garabin said, "The person that did this likely lived in Bridgetown, been familiar with Bridgetown, or had a reason to be where they were in that park." He added, "We believe there are witnesses out there who saw the abductor, who saw the vehicle in the area of the park, and either haven't come forward because they're afraid to come forward, or haven't come forward because they don't realize how important the information is that they have." One problem faced by detectives straight away was the amount of rumors circulating on social media. Various online groups were started to circulate news and information about her case. People would join searches and go live on Facebook to bring awareness to the search efforts. On September 18th, a vigil was held as the community came together to try and help. Within the first few days of the search, dive teams were deployed to search the various bodies of water around the area. The search was expanded on land and from the air to try and generate any new leads. Bloodhounds were being used to try and find any scent of her. They were able to pick something up for roughly an hour before they lost the scent. Dulce's 3-year-old brother Manny, who had most likely witnessed whatever had happened, did not speak very much. The FBI had taken him back there in an attempt to find out exactly what it was he had seen. But this went nowhere. Police said again that Dulce's family were being very cooperative with the investigation efforts, and her grandmother was out putting flyers up. More than 300 officers were drafted in for the search, and sex offenders in the area were also tracked down to account for their whereabouts too. More than 500 vehicles had been checked, and more than 200 locations had also been searched. Rumors began to circulate that Dulce's mother had been arrested, but this was false. And at a press conference, the police chief spoke about the need to stick to the facts. Those in the community were living in fear that this could happen again. One resident said, "Everybody is worried about their own family. It's pretty scary." And another said, "It's not the same aside from being here. We are with our kids, but at all times we are looking to make sure they don't get away from us, or looking to see if we see anything strange." It had now been a week, and police issued an appeal for anyone who was in the park that day, and who may have taken photos or videos to come forward, as they may have inadvertently caught something of significance. A big problem being faced by the authorities was that some in the community feared if they came forward with information, it could affect their immigration status. On Tuesday, September 24th, the police announced that, via telephone, they had successfully made contact with Dulce's father who lived in Mexico, hoping to see if he could shed any light on why his daughter would be abducted. 2 weeks after her disappearance, Dulce's mother gave a press conference. Some people still continued to not buy what Noma was saying, but she hit back at these claims. That really affected me when I saw all the comments saying, "I sold her, I killed her, that I know where she is." That really affected me. I've seen a lot of cases where mothers do that to their kids. But I love my daughter a lot, and she knows that. Some questioned her apparently calm demeanor, but Noma explained that she did not cry in front of people, not even her parents. Noma's phone was also taken away several times by the authorities, so that they could check through it for any relevant information. By early October, the reward for information was standing at $40,000. Noma and her mother gave an interview to NJ.com where Noma said that the police had told her they weren't going to give up on her daughter's case. She also spoke about the impact that this had had on her son Manny, saying that he had changed since his sister had gone missing. She said he had become more aggressive with other children and stopped listening, adding that he wasn't like that before. She and her mother said they wanted people to continue to look for Dulce, with Norma even speaking about hiring a private detective. But they were unable to due to the money it would cost. Norma also said she wanted other states to join in the search for Dulce, but didn't know how to go about getting them involved. Noma explained that she was trying her best to be strong for her children. Authorities had appeared to rule out the involvement of Dulce's father Edgar, saying that the FBI had spoken to him. On October 15th, a police sketch was issued of someone they wanted to talk to. He was described and drawn as follows: a slender male, possibly Hispanic, standing at between 5'6" and 5'8", roughly 30 to 35 years old, with acne on his face. He was seen wearing a black shirt, orange sneakers, red trousers, and a baseball cap. Police Chief Gamari said that some people who bore a resemblance to the sketch had been brought in and questioned, but were subsequently released. The public were asked to be aware of any people who maybe had failed to turn up for work in the days surrounding her going missing, or anybody who had changed their vehicle or appearance since then. Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae urged people to be aware of any sudden children and families, saying, "If you know a family that didn't have a child, pops up with a child that's in the 5-6 years old range, and that seems suspicious to you, then I'd ask you to contact our FBI or our tip line or Bridgerton Police and get us that information." The response from across the country had been huge. Police Chief Gamari said, "The country is on alert. I can't even tell you that there's a state we haven't received a tip from." The case would reach an even larger audience when it was featured on the TV show Dr. Phil in December 2019. When Dr. Phil interviewed Noma, he asked her if she thought Dulce may have known whoever had taken her, but she said she was unsure. He continued to press her on who might be responsible. She then mentioned an old friend who had confronted her several times prior to her daughter going missing. She said, "Last time he saw me and my daughter together, and he just waved at me and said, 'Hi,' and he asked me if that was my daughter, and I said yes." She said that he had tried to date her several times, but she had rejected his advances. Noma would also tell Action News that the person in question was one of the last people to see her daughter, but she added that she did not suspect he was involved. She said she was only answering Dr. Phil's questions, and that was why she had mentioned him. She also said during the interview that she had taken a polygraph after being asked to by the police, but they hadn't given her the results of the test. Although her demeanor on the show did strike many as very calm, and maybe even a bit odd, Dr. Phil did note that her first language is Spanish, and when she made an appeal to her daughter in her native tongue, the emotion was much more apparent. She said in the interview that she felt like she had failed her daughter, and that if she was found, she would apologize to her. Jackie Rodriguez had been the spokesperson for the family, and although she no longer is, she appeared on the episode 2 and spoke about Noma. She said, "She seems too calm. She knows that that child is okay. She's missing her, but I think she knows that the child is okay." She also said that she hadn't known Noma before Dulce had disappeared, and that she had only seen her cry once. Dr. Phil said he would also be contributing to the reward, bringing the total to $75,000. Petitions to have cameras installed at the park had also garnered collectively nearly 2,000 signatures. This morning, I signed an executive order directing nearly all of our 9 million residents to quite simply stay at home. In March 2020, COVID-19 put a halt on normal investigative practices. There were no more face-to-face briefings. Courts were shut, and traveling out of state was significantly harder. Several psychics came forward, with one saying they had communicated with Dulce and that she was buried in a shallow grave near her school. Former FBI Special Agent J.J. Claver said that whilst he couldn't speak for the police department, the FBI would not place any credibility on information that had been provided to them by a psychic. Alongside the thousands of tips that had come in, 3 cryptic letters had been found in Ohio. One at a library, one at an ice cream shop, and one at a racetrack and casino. An index card had been sent to the racetrack and casino, and a letter had been mailed to the library. Police in Austintown had carried out searches, but these had turned up nothing. The handwriting appeared to have come from the same person. The letter sent to the library was 2 pages long and made reference to Dulce and her mother's appearance on Dr. Phil. However, the information in the letter could all have been found with a simple Google search. The letter had a Cleveland postmark, but it could have been sent from the Austintown area. The index card that was sent to the ice cream shop in Weatherfield Township, a few miles away from Austintown, was found in the mailbox of the shop. It was postmarked from February 21st. The index card sent to the racetrack and casino gave details that were specific to Austintown, which is close to the Pennsylvania border. It also did not have a postmark. Much of the writing was illegible, but according to a police report, part of it read, "Look for Dulce Alavez, age 5. Kidnapped from Bridgerton, New Jersey. Look website for story/photos. Dr. Phil, 76 truck stop, Dead End Street. Entrance Woods. Please look." The return address was illegible, but the zip code was traced to Mexico. But the police didn't know if this was really where it had come from. Investigators searched an area of roughly 40 acres near to the racecourse with cadaver dogs and infrared technology after the letter said she could be in that area. But nothing was found. It was announced that the letters were going to be sent to the police in New Jersey so that more investigations could be carried out to determine who had written them. Police Chief Gamari said, "We are investigating to see if we can determine what the source is. Because if it doesn't come back as related, we want to know that." But he also emphasized that if these were part of a hoax, he wanted to see whoever had sent them prosecuted for distributing false information. The former family spokesperson Jackie Rodriguez said she had received a letter in March. It was random scribbles on bits of paper with words like 1776, campground, and Mexico on them. One thing immediately stood out. No address had been assigned to the envelope. It had been sent in. Gamari said he still believed the community was withholding information from investigators. "I can say that we still firmly believe that there are people in the public that have information that they are not sharing with us," he said. On the 1-year anniversary of Dulce's disappearance, Noma gave an interview about her daughter's case. She said, "It gives me bad memories because I wish I could go back to the time and come with her to the park and not leave her alone." Cumberland County Prosecutor Jennifer Webb McCrae said that with the absence of evidence suggesting that Dulce had died, they were going to hold onto the hope that she was still alive. It was around this time that local law enforcement reached out again to Dulce's father Edgar after a video was posted to YouTube on Dulce's birthday. 2 years after her disappearance, the community held a silent walk. It had now been 3 years since Dulce had disappeared. An age-progressed image of her by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was issued to the public. A vigil had also been planned at the park she had vanished from. On what would have been her 8th birthday, people gathered to remember her. The search for Dulce Maria Alavez continues. Detectives continue to carry out interviews and investigations in the United States and Mexico and follow all lines of inquiry. The family home still contains her favorite toys and dresses as they wait for her to come home. Her backpack remains where she left it, untouched, with her school papers from her last day at kindergarten inside. Her mother said, "I have all of Dulce's dresses in safekeeping. We have not gotten rid of any of her clothes. We haven't given it away. Her dresses, her shoes, all of it. Her toys too. We don't let anyone touch her things. They're there for her." They also remain in the same home, hopeful that she will one day walk back through the door. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Dulce Maria Alavez, you can contact the Bridgerton Police Department or the FBI. There is also a phone number for Spanish speakers to call with any information. You can also contact the New Jersey State Police Missing Persons Unit. 17-year-old Chundra May lived in Pea Ridge, an unincorporated community in Scott County, Mississippi, about 12 miles north of the county seat of Forest. Since 1970, her mother's family had settled as neighbors along a dirt road off Mississippi Route 35. Doctors had told Chundra's parents, Janelle and Richard, that they would never have biological children, leading them to adopt their son, Tim. However, the diagnosis was proven wrong when Janelle gave birth to Chundra just 8 months after Tim's adoption. The close age gap between the two siblings only strengthened their bond in their tightly knit family. In early 1986, Chundra was excitedly preparing for her high school graduation. A senior at League Academy in neighboring League County, she was part of a small class of 36 students. Though not particularly outgoing, Chundra's warm personality allowed her to make friends easily. She was a diligent student, a member of the National Honor Society, and involved with both the school newspaper and the student Christian organization. Outside school, Chundra held a part-time job at a McDonald's in Forest, Mississippi. On Tuesday, February 4th, 1986, she returned home from school, did some homework, and had a quick dinner with her mother before leaving around 5:30 for her 6 p.m. shift. The drive down the highway to the restaurant typically took 15 to 20 minutes, but Chundra left early to ensure she wouldn't be late. That evening, rain had been falling and few customers were coming out to McDonald's. The manager decided to send some of the other employees, including Chundra, home early since there was not enough work for all of them. Chundra clocked out at 7:24 p.m. but sat in the dining room of the restaurant for 15 minutes, waiting just in case business suddenly picked up and she would be asked to clock back in. After no rush of customers came, she finally left the restaurant around 7:40 p.m. Chundra's parents insisted that she call home before she started the drive home after all of her shifts, so that someone at the house would know when to expect her and to go out looking for her in case she had car trouble out on the road at night. As she did after every shift, Chundra called her mother from the payphone before getting into her car. On the way home, Chundra stopped at the TG&Y, a dime store, and purchased a Valentine's Day card, presumably for her boyfriend Tony, the first boy she had ever dated. Chundra's father Richard worked as a riverboat captain for a shipping firm based out of New Orleans, piloting a towboat that pushed barges up the Mississippi River. His job required him to be away from home for a full month at a time, followed by a full month off of work. On February 4th, he was working, and his boat was just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. He called home to check on his family at approximately 8:20 p.m. When his wife, Janelle, answered the phone, she told him that Chundra had not yet arrived home, even though she was expected to arrive by 8 o'clock. Richard told Janelle to go next door and ask her brother-in-law, Olten to drive along the route. Chundra would drive home from work and look for her in case she had car trouble and was stranded along the highway. However, when Janelle went outside to walk next door, she saw Chundra's car, a blue 1982 Isuzu, in the road just shy of their driveway, less than 75 yards away from the front door of their home. When she went up to the car, the engine was still running, and the interior light was on because the front driver's side door was open. This front window was partially rolled down. The radio was on, but the volume was turned down. All of Chundra's belongings, her purse, glasses, work apron, school books, and coat, were all inside the car. The only item that would later be determined to be missing was Chundra's driver's license. There was no sign of Chundra herself. The scene was strange, but there were no obvious signs of a struggle outside of the car, holding on to hope that there was an innocent explanation for her daughter not coming inside the house. Janelle called Chundra's boyfriend to see if he had picked her up. When she called his house, he was there with his parents and had been there all evening. Janelle called the police. Based on the scene where her car was found, authorities quickly determined that Chundra had not left on her own accord. Furthermore, it was out of character for her to abandon her responsibilities, and she would not intentionally cause stress for her mother in particular because she was in poor health. Janelle suffered from diabetes and had been in and out of the hospital for the past 3 years. Worsening problems with her kidneys had resulted in her becoming dependent on dialysis treatments for the previous 6 months. Janelle had taken care of her children all of their lives, but now Chundra was helping take care of her mother as her health deteriorated. Chundra did not resent these extra responsibilities, and caring for her mother just made their relationship even stronger. The search for Chundra began in the immediate area around her home. Initially, it was just her family and law enforcement looking for her. However, as the physical search area expanded, the support from the community also grew. Students and teachers from her school helped search for her. The owners of the McDonald's where she worked posted missing persons flyers inside the restaurant. Chundra's co-workers included flyers in the bags of every drive-through order they served. Within 2 weeks of Chundra's disappearance, more than 25,000 missing persons flyers were distributed throughout the state of Mississippi. The Mississippi State Police conducted aerial and ground searches, which took place in 3 different counties. Rumors quickly circulated that Chundra had been abducted by someone posing as a police officer. After her disappearance, authorities received several reports from individuals who said that a non-police vehicle with a flashing blue light had attempted to pull them over on the highway Chundra would have traveled to get home. The scenario would make sense in light of some of the circumstances of Chundra's disappearance. Chundra's driver's license was missing, which could be explained if she took it out to present to someone she believed was a police officer. Furthermore, the fact that she pulled over the road when she was in sight of her driveway was puzzling. However, if she believed she was being pulled over by a police officer, she may have pulled over immediately instead of driving the few extra seconds to pull in the driveway. This possibility is complicated by testimony from Chandra's cousin, David Spivey, who lived next door to her. The evening Chandra disappeared, he saw her driving down the road towards her house after noticing the light from her headlights. According to David, no one was driving behind her at the time. The location where her car was found was just past his home, halfway between his house and hers. This would seem to indicate that whoever abducted Chundra had been waiting for her near her home and perhaps blocked her way down the road, forcing her to stop short of her driveway. However, this would have been difficult to coordinate without Chundra's entire extended family witnessing them waiting for an extended period of time. Furthermore, Chundra had deviated from her normal schedule that evening because she was unexpectedly sent home from work early. Even if her abductor had studied her normal movements, they would not have known to be waiting for her at that time. According to some of Chundra's co-workers, she had been concerned that someone may have been following her in the week before her disappearance. She had been unable to clearly see what kind of vehicle they were in. Several of her co-workers reported to their assistant manager that Chundra was worried but did not want to tell her parents about the person potentially following her because she knew they would make her quit her job out of concern for her safety. Chundra's disappearance destroyed the sense of safety her neighbors thought living in a small town provided them. Regardless of whether or not they played a role in Chundra's disappearance, the community took reports of a non-police vehicle attempting to pull over vehicles in the area seriously, with teachers at Chundra's school advising students not to pull over when they saw flashing blue lights unless they could confirm they were on a police vehicle. Teenagers traveled in pairs and in groups, and many were not allowed out after dark for a time. The National Guard conducted searches with the help of civilian volunteers. On February 19th, Chundra's case was formally declared a kidnapping, which allowed the FBI to join the investigation. Physical searches continued, a reward was offered, and tips were regularly called in, but Chundra was not found. Chundra would be missing for 22 days. On February 26, 1986, an off-duty firefighter was digging for worms to use as fishing bait in the banks of Baker's Lake. The lake was located near Bolton, Mississippi in Hinds County, approximately 80 miles away from Chundra's family home. He noticed something floating in the water. It was a body wrapped in plastic bags. When police examined the body, it was wearing a class ring from League Academy, which was engraved with Chundra's initials, leading to her preliminary identification. Dental records would later confirm that the body was Chundra May's. The day Chundra's body was found would have been her 18th birthday. Chundra's body had been bound with fiber-reinforced packing tape and wrapped in plastic bags before it was thrown into the lake. Chundra's initial autopsy did not conclusively identify a cause of death, so a second one was ordered. At the second autopsy, The pathologist determined that Chundra had been raped and had been struck on the left side of her head. The blow to her head had not caused a skull fracture, and while it had occurred while she was still alive, it was unlikely to have caused her death. The two pathologists who performed the autopsies differed in their opinion over whether the tape used to bind Chundra had been applied while she was still alive or after she was already dead. A large tape mark was visible on her neck when the second autopsy was performed. This led to the pathologist determining that Chundra had most likely died as a result of strangulation. Based on the exact location of the heavy tape mark, he also determined that if Chundra had struggled against her bindings, the tape around her neck could have stimulated her carotid arteries, which could have interfered with her heart beating properly. While Chundra had been missing for just over 3 weeks, she had been alive for the majority of that time. While neither of her autopsies resulted in an exact time of her death being identified, both pathologists found that she had been killed approximately 5 to 10 days before her body was found, meaning she had been held alive somewhere for at least 12 days. When Chundra was laid to rest in a small cemetery south of her community, the date of her death was left blank on her headstone as no one knew the exact date she died. Chundra's community began collecting money for a reward for information in her case when she was still missing, and the donations continued after her body was found. The donations ranged from $10 brought in by individual members of the community to $5,000 offered by the owners of the McDonald's franchise where Chundra worked. The local governments of both Scott County, where Chundra lived, and neighboring Lee County, where she attended school, voted to donate $25,100 to the reward, the maximum amount allowed by law. The reward eventually grew to $53,413. For individuals from Scott County underwent polygraph examinations in March of 1986 in connection to Chundra's case. A man accused of kidnapping a woman in the city of Hattiesburg underwent one that August. Authorities seemingly focused in on the theory that Chundra had stopped her car short of her driveway because she believed she was being pulled over by a police officer. They polygraphed an offender who used a blue light to deceive his victims in July. A Scott County Sheriff's deputy was also investigated and given a polygraph exam in connection to the case. All of these individuals passed their polygraph examinations. At the end of September, authorities asked Chundra's father, Richard May, to undergo a polygraph examination as well. Richard had been working on a boat 200 miles away from the site of his daughter's abduction at the time it occurred. On September 29, 1986, investigators with the Mississippi State Police and the Mississippi Highway Patrol came to the May family home and asked Richard if he would come with them to Jackson for a polygraph examination. He left with them and underwent the examination that afternoon. The results showed no signs of deception in Richard's answers. While Richard voluntarily submitted to the exam, he was frustrated by being asked to take it as he knew it would not help find his daughter's killer. However, he put those feelings aside for the benefit of his daughter's case. I took the test of my own free will because I have been and am willing to do whatever it takes to get the state and county law enforcement to find out who killed Chundra, he told the Scott County Times the day after the examination. Leads and Chundra's case became fewer and farther between as time passed. In August of 1992, Reuben Weeks, who was serving a life sentence plus 30 years for rape and kidnapping in Missouri, was brought to Mississippi for questioning in the case due to similarities between Chundra's murder and the crime for which he was incarcerated. On October 13, 1991, he had pulled a motel clerk from her car. She was bound with tape and raped. Weeks was apprehended in his home state of Mississippi, where he had an extensive criminal record consisting of mainly nonviolent offenses. He had previously been a trustee in the Scott County Jail. He ultimately could not be tied to Chundra's murder. Another man, who had been questioned in relation to Chundra's case twice, since 1988, was arrested and charged with abducting and sexually assaulting a young woman in 1993. This led to investigators in Mississippi and Alabama looking into him for at least 3 unsolved murders, including Chundra's, but no evidence connecting him to any of the murders could ever be found. Chundra's murder was covered by a local news channel in March of 2021, which led to a group of retired local investigators taking an interest in the case. They followed up on old leads and have been looking for new ones. Any information they may uncover will be turned over to the Scott County Sheriff's Department. Unfortunately, Forensic evidence will most likely not be as useful in Chundra's case as it has been in solving other cold cases in recent years. Almost none of the evidence in the case has been properly preserved. Chundra's family used her car to look for her the night she disappeared, unknowingly disturbing potential forensic evidence. The tape used to bind Chundra and the garbage bag Chundra's body was wrapped in were also removed by the young deputy who first responded to the scene, as proper crime scene preservation was not as well understood at the time. Investigators today are limited in the amount of forensic evidence available to them. They do believe that witness testimony may help them finally close the case. While the passage of time can cause some types of evidence to deteriorate, it can also destroy relationships and remove threats that may have previously prevented witnesses from coming forward. Chundra's mother passed away as a result of worsening kidney disease in 1994. Chundra's brother and father still live in Mississippi. Richard May understands that he may never learn what happened to his daughter during his lifetime. However, he continues to pray that one day he will see Chundra again and she will be able to provide him with the answers he is still searching for herself. In early May 2010, a man approached two unhoused men in Santa Monica, California, offering them $1,000 to split if they would kill someone for him. One of the men, known as Big Dave, expressed discomfort with committing a murder in public. The man then suggested he could return later to show Big Dave how to enter the target's house discreetly. Concerned, Big Dave reported the encounter to his police liaison officer, revealing the man's intentions. Law enforcement set up a sting operation, with Big Dave agreeing to wear a wire. They soon discovered that the man was Juan Carlos Cruz, a Food Network celebrity chef known for his show Calorie Commando. Cruz, who had moved from the Dominican Republic to the United States at age 3, had been passionate about cooking since childhood. He attended culinary school in California, specializing in pastry, and later worked as a soup pastry chef at the Hotel Bel Air, creating pastries for celebrities like Oprah, Jack Nicholson, and Julia Roberts before breaking into television. Cruz was married to his high school sweetheart, Jennifer Campbell. Investigators uncovered that Jennifer, his wife, was the intended target of the planned hit. On May 12th, Cruz took Big Dave to his apartment to demonstrate how to enter undetected. He gave him the code to the security system, and he told Big Dave to slit Jennifer's throat, but later changed his mind to strangulation, so there wouldn't be much of a mess to clean up. It was all for the relatively low sum of $1,000, but he gave the men strict instructions not to harm his dogs. He even offered to provide the men with dog treats so that their dogs wouldn't alert anyone when he entered the apartment. Once law enforcement had what they needed, they arrested Cruz, who was charged with attempted murder and solicitation to commit murder. He would plead not guilty, but by October 2010, he pleaded no contest to the solicitation to commit murder, and the prosecution dropped the attempted murder charge. He was sentenced in December 2010 to 9 years in prison with the option of parole at 4.5 years. Later, it would come out in the media that Cruz was alleging that he wanted to hire the men because his wife had been very depressed following multiple failed fertility treatments. They had spent over $200,000 on the treatment and were out of options. After the last round didn't work, his wife is reported to have wanted to kill herself, but couldn't do it for religious reasons. Cruz is alleged to have attempted to hire hitmen as an act of mercy, so his wife didn't take her own life, though his story changed multiple times over the course of the investigation. During the trial, his wife could be seen in the courtroom. After the conviction and sentencing, Cruz was not talked about in the media again. It is believed that he is still married to his wife. He would have been eligible for parole in 2015. If he'd finished his whole sentence, he would have been released in 2019. On April 16, 2004, Mike Danton, 24, was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder in a murder-for-hire plot that crossed state lines. Mike Danton, formerly Mike Jefferson, was a Canadian NFL hockey player. He was drafted in 2000 and was the 135th pick by the New Jersey Devils. He was ultimately traded to the St. Louis Blues, where he played his last game in the NFL. Danton was born and raised in Brampton, Ontario, and he's said to have had a strained relationship with his family. He formed a close relationship with his coach, David Frost. Frost was also the coach of Sheldon Keefe, who the NFL would also draft in 1999, a year earlier. He would go on to become the head coach for the Toronto Maple Leafs. In his mid-30s in 2004, David Frost would become Danton and Keefe's agent within the NFL. Some were surprised by this because David Frost had been banned from several junior hockey leagues in Canada. He was accepted into the NFL Players Association as an agent. David Frost was very involved. Some would say he controlled what Danton could and couldn't do, making it so Danton had to come to Frost for every issue about his career. So what happened with Mike Danton? The FBI's order of events was that Mike Danton, while in the playoffs in San Jose, California against the San Jose Sharks, Mike Danton called a woman that he'd had a brief relationship with, Katie Wolfmeyer, asking if she knew anyone who could help him hire someone for $10,000 to have someone killed. Katie then got Danton in touch with her acquaintance, Justin Levi Jones. Some reports say that Jones was with Katie when she first got the call and offered to help. Unknown to both Katie and Danton, Jones was a law enforcement officer in St. Louis. Jones reported that plan to the authorities, who then set up a recording so that Jones could accept the hit. Danton would ask Jones to kill the person that was staying in his apartment in the next few days. Danton would say he was afraid for his life and that the person coming in was coming to hurt him. Jones was asked to make it look like a burglary gone wrong, and the person who was in the apartment at that time was David Frost. The FBI would stipulate that Danton had a fight with Frost over his behavior of drinking and partying, and that Danton was worried that Frost would tell the NFL team about it, so that he wanted to have Frost killed before he could. Frost would deny to the media that he was the intended target even today. Danton and Frost would have multiple phone conversations while Danton was in jail awaiting trial until a judge banned communication between the two. The FBI had released some of these conversations. They would show a unique relationship between the two, including Frost telling Danton, "If you love me, you should say it," with Danton ending the phone call with "I love you." These phone conversations would bring some speculation of more of a relationship between the two, but it's never been confirmed. While awaiting trial, Danton's lawyers had him evaluated by a psychologist. It is believed that they might have tried to mount an insanity defense, but in July 2004, Danton pleaded guilty to the federal conspiracy to commit murder. Because the phone call had crossed state lines, it was a federal case from the beginning. When he pleaded guilty, he said David Frost had been the intended target. Prosecutors allowed Danton to apply to be moved to a Canadian prison facility as he pleaded guilty. At that time, Danton's lawyers hoped to get him moved quickly because it was believed that they could get him better help in Canada, as that prison system had better counseling opportunities for inmates. Mike Danton was sentenced on November 9, 2004 to 7.5 years. In March 2009, after 5 years in federal prison, the United States Bureau of Prisons approved Mike Danton's transfer to a Canadian prison. On September 11, 2009, Mike Danton was released from prison on parole. Conditions of his parole include no face-to-face meetings with David Frost and no contact with his father. Katie Wolfmeyer was also arrested on the same charge of conspiracy to commit murder. Her case went to trial as she turned down a 2-year plea deal. She was eventually acquitted of all charges on September 2004. Mike Danton didn't testify at her trial. After being convicted, Mike Danton revealed that his intended target was his father. Danton said that he'd feared for his life around his father when he'd been abused by his father both physically and sexually. Mike Danton's father has denied this all and blames David Frost for his son's behavior and career downfall. There are multiple allegations against Frost for sexual harassment from other NFL and junior NFL players. He was charged in 2008 and went to trial, but was acquitted in the end due to insufficient evidence. His systematic abuse appears to be an open secret in the NFL. According to sources, he's moved to the USA and works at a hockey academy in California under a new name. The FBI is adamant that David Frost was the intended target, but both Frost and Danton have stated multiple times since then that it had been his father. While he was incarcerated, Mike Danton took a university course through correspondence. After Danton's release, he went to university in January 2010 at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. There, he joined the university hockey team, the Huskies, and played his first game since 2004 in January 2010. His team would win the Canadian University Cup that year. He would eventually return to professional hockey. He was drafted into a Swedish professional hockey league in 2011, and he played his last professional game on a Polish team in 2017. Mike Danton now lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and says that going to jail changed his life. That, quote, "I was in a pretty messed up state at the time, that's for sure, and it's a big reason why I went for psychology in my undergrad, and now I'm working towards my major in sports psychology." He now runs the Mike Danton Hockey Academy and works with future hockey players. On May 4th, 2001, 44-year-old Bonnie Lee Bakley was discovered to have been shot twice in her husband's car while he went to get something he'd left in the restaurant, Vitello's, in Los Angeles, California. The husband was famed actor Robert Blake, and the item he forgot at the restaurant was a handgun he'd alleged fell out of his pocket while dining. The restaurant was near the home he shared with his wife. Robert Blake was a well-known actor born in 1933. His first film credit was in 1939 working as a child actor. Born Michael James Vincenzo Gubitazzi, the production company he worked for, MGM, suggested the name change to Bobby or Robert Blake. His most infamous role was the lead in a TV show called Barada in the 1967 movie In Cold Blood. Robert Blake would quickly be looked at with suspicion after his wife's death. Blake would tell police that he was not with his wife when she was shot because he'd returned to the restaurant to retrieve a gun that had fallen from his pocket. He told police he was carrying the weapon to protect his wife as she had a criminal past. Bonnie Lee Bakley was married to Robert Blake only 6 months after a paternity test proved that Bakley's daughter, who had initially been named Christian Shannon Brando, named because Bakley originally believed this child's father to be Christian Brando, son of famous actor Marlon Brando. After the test proved that Blake was the father, her name was changed to Rose Leonore Sophia Blake, and the two were wed shortly after. Robert Blake was Bonnie's 10th husband. Some of her marriages only lasted 1 day. 2 she had met at a jazz club. She was reported to seek out older men, some famous, some for money. Her longest marriage was only 5 years, and she had 4 children in total. After the shooting, information on who Bonnie was came to life. She was known to be a con woman who would put out ads in magazines, and if a man answered the ad, she would send provocative pictures of herself in hopes that they would reach out to her and she could convince them to give her money or even blackmail them. Some reports have said that she even used her eldest daughter to entrap men. Friends of Bonnie admitted that she was obsessed with celebrities, and she not only tried to become famous in her own right, but she'd do anything to marry a star. Some of her cons would get her arrested. In 1989, she was arrested on drug-related charges. In 1995, she was arrested for check fraud, and in 1998, she was arrested again for fraud, having possessed multiple driver's licenses and social security cards. She was sentenced to 3 years probation. She was still on probation when she met Robert Blake. Bonnie is alleged to have used men to get ahead and put herself in the limelight, so it was said that when she snagged a real Hollywood star, an established actor with a storied career, it had been a dream come true, but the feeling wasn't shared with her new husband. Law enforcement revealed to the press that the gun Blake had left in the restaurant had been tested, and it was confirmed to have not been used to shoot Bonnie. However, on the day of the murder, Blake was tested for gunshot residue on his hands and clothes and tested positive. There were no residue on his hands and clothes and tested positive. There were no witnesses to the crime. A buzzer from the restaurant would later contradict the account and say that there was no gun left at the restaurant when he cleared the table right after the couple had left. The murder weapon was discovered in a garbage dumpster near the crime scene with 1 bullet still in the chamber. It was noted as being an unusual vintage revolver. The gun wasn't registered to Blake, and law enforcement couldn't find a connection to any owner. Robert Blake's home was searched, with authorities finding similar ammunition to that used in the murder, and reported that 3 bullets were missing from the box. It took nearly a year for the prosecution to gather enough evidence, and in April 2002, Robert Blake was arrested at his sister's home. He'd been staying there with his daughter. He was charged with 2 counts of solicitation of murder and 1 count with special circumstances, which meant that the star could face the death penalty. Earl Caldwell, Blake's bodyguard, was also arrested and charged. Allegations that the star had asked 2 stunt performers that had formerly worked with Blake if they could kill his wife, reported having offered the men $10,000. Both men have stated that they refused the offer and testified at his trial. However, it was deemed suspicious that neither men went to law enforcement sooner with the information. Authorities believe that Robert Blake had killed his wife himself after he tried and failed to hire someone to kill her. Blake is reported to have felt trapped in his marriage to Bakley and just wanted it to end. He had hired a private investigator to dig into Bonnie's past, and it was only then that he discovered Bonnie had continued her lonely heart scam even after they were married, which included sending nude photographs. It was later revealed that the two never lived together. Bonnie lived in a guest house on Blake's property, and the two shared custody of Rose. It's revealed that the couple had a tumultuous relationship, and I think that's kind of an understatement. Blake never truly trusted his new wife. Her pregnancy had been unexpected to say the least, and letters between the two revealed how they discussed at great lengths about what to do about the pregnancy. Though it wasn't just Robert Blake who had motive to murder Bonnie, she had swindled men across the country, some out of their entire life savings. After her murder, records were discovered in her home, meticulously detailed ledgers with who sent her money, when, and for how much. Friends of Bonnie revealed that her victims had often threatened her. They also stated that Bonnie had told them that Robert Blake threatened to kill her. She told her brother she thought that Robert might murder her. After Robert Blake was arrested, he spent almost a year behind bars before a bail was set at $1.5 million. He was kept on house arrest until the trial. Blake also paid the $1 million bond for his bodyguard. The trial started in December 2004 and lasted until March 2005. Blake was initially found not guilty of murder and one of the solicitations of murder charges. The second charge was dropped after the jury was deadlocked at 11-1 for acquittal. Blake's acquittal had left mixed feelings in the press. Some believed he was still guilty. Bakley's three oldest children filed a civil case against Robert Blake stating he was responsible for Bonnie's death. In November 2005, the civil jury found that Robert Blake was liable for the wrongful death of his wife. He was ordered to pay $30 million. In 2006, Blake filed for bankruptcy. He attempted to appeal the decision in 2007 in which the court upheld the verdict, but changed the awarded money to $15 million. In civil court, Earl Caldwell, Blake's bodyguard, was also acquitted and found not liable for the death. After the acquittal and bankruptcy, Blake maintained a low profile, only doing a few interviews now and again. In 2019, he started a YouTube channel called Robert Blake. I ain't dead yet, so stay tuned. That same year would be the first time Rose would come forward to talk about her life since her mother's death. Rose had been 11 months old when her mother died and since had lived with Blake's oldest daughter, Delilah. Rose didn't see her father after she turned 5, and in 2019, she visited her father for the first time since then. In an interview, she is said to have talked about an interest in acting and knowing the truth about what happened to her mother. She didn't comment if she believed her father had done it. After all the legal fees and civil judgments paid, Robert Blake was broke. He lived off his Social Security and the Screen Actors Guild's pension for the rest of his life. In March 2023, Robert Blake died at the age of 89 of heart disease. Bonnie Lee Bakley's murder remains unsolved. Raymond Jones was an outgoing and popular man. He always had a smile on his face, and he loved to tease and play jokes. When he met a woman named Betty in the 1950s, they had many common interests like dancing and fishing. The two began spending all their time together, engaged in all the activities they both loved. The couple married and had 3 children together. Their one son, Jeffrey, shared Ray's birthday of September 7th. Betty and Ray also loved racing stock cars. But this shared interest would ultimately tear them apart rather than keep them together. Betty was in a serious wreck, and while she survived, she was left paralyzed from the waist down. The stress of her serious injury put a strain on the marriage, and Betty and Ray ultimately divorced. The couple's children stayed with their mother at their home in Montana, while Ray moved to Salmon, Idaho. He got remarried to a woman named Donna, and the couple adopted a little boy. Ray became very close with his neighbors, the Pearson family, and the Joneses and the Pearsons spent a lot of time together. Raymond would practice shooting with his friend, Ralph Pearson, and would play tricks on Ralph's young children. Ralph Pearson would be the last known person to see Ray alive. Ray spent his 39th birthday, September 7, 1968, out bow hunting with a hunting party that included Ralph as well as 2 other hunters. They set up camp in the Hayden Creek area of Lemhi County, Idaho. Later that afternoon, Ray signaled to Ralph that he was going to move up higher on the mountain they were hunting on. When it began getting dark, Ralph returned to they contacted the sheriff, and a larger search involving more than 70 people, as well as search dogs, began on September 9th. In addition to the ground search, helicopters were brought in to look for Ray from the air. The search effort had to be called off after just a few days because of snow. It was briefly reopened a few days later when footprints were found on a ridge near the area where Ray had gone missing, but no sign of him was found. 2 days after his father went missing, Jeffrey Jones received a birthday card from him in the mail. I believed for a long time that he would be found. I kept hoping, and it was probably 15 years before I finally gave up. Rumors and stories kept circulating that somebody had seen him or that he took off. I heard all this stuff and just kept expecting or hoping that he would walk through the door one day, Jeffrey would later say. Ralph Pearson never used the bow he had been hunting with on the day Ray vanished again. It remained on the top shelf of his closet until he passed away in 2010, and possession of it went to his daughter Kendra. The last thing Ralph's daughter Karen said to him before he died was, "Dad, go find Ray." Ray would not be found until 53 years and 10 days after he disappeared. Around 4 p.m. on September 17, 2021, a bow hunter was taking a shortcut between 2 hunting areas when he came across human remains. He called the Lemhi County Sheriff's Office to notify them of his discovery. Because it was so late in the day, they were not able to come of Raymond Jones. The bow hunter who found the remains has not been publicly identified, but he has spoken to Ray's family. I'm very relieved to know what happened. I'm grateful to the guy that found him. I couldn't have asked for a better person to find my dad. After talking to him, he's just a super guy, Jeffrey Jones said after speaking with the hunter. Ray had told the other hunters he had wanted to look for mountain goats that day while they were back at camp. A large rock matching the type of rock that made up the cliffs above where the remains were found was found covering the lower half of the remains. The hunter who found Ray told Jeffrey that he believed Ray may have seen mountain goats at the top of the cliffs and then tried to climb up the cliff to see them better. Part of the cliff may have broken off as he did so and landed on top of him after he fell. The past week and a half have been surreal, but I'm very lucky to know what happened to my dad after all these years, Jeffrey said after his father's remains were found. I could have gone my whole life without knowing, but now I know, and it brings some peace. Jeffrey planned to bring his father's remains back to Montana so that Ray can be buried next to his parents. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.